I've restarted the recording. So that means all Gail talked about with everybody, the whole world's not going to hear.
I don't think there was anything that we had to worry about.
They won't hear my fair salutations.
Well, sorry. It also keeps the meeting a little bit shorter when I try to upload it. It looks like we're getting a good collection on. Welcome, everybody. It's 4:01, so we should get a little started. Um, hopefully you all received the minutes. I will share them online right now if you did not. Not the minutes, but the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, what I'm sharing here is not the agenda, it's the notes, which is basically the agendas with stuff added. Um, and let's get started here. To begin with, I'd like to welcome Brandy Chaplin, I believe it's pronounced, who is the new coordinator for Loon Watch. So, Brandy, did you want to share anything with everybody?
Not too much. Happy to be here. Looking forward to learning from you all. And yeah, reach out if you have anything to talk about Loon Watch or Loon related.
Where is Loon Watch? I should know, but I don't.
Loon Watch is based at Northland College in Ashland, Wisconsin.
Thank you.
Erica Lemoyne used to be the hold that position, and she's now with Greenfire. Am I right,
Wisconsin
Mark?
Greenfire.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that's good to know. And maybe if we have time at the end, we'll go over and do an update from everybody. But I don't know how long Jay's presentation is, so I won't do that for now. Now, on a couple other notes, I don't know how many people here saw that the common loon was the American Birding Association Bird of the Year this year. Yes, and so I'll put those up as well. I just thought I'd mention this to everybody because I think it's something that as a group we can leverage. Doug Tozer also did a great blog on the loon that you can also see on that website, and that, unlike most of the articles by the ABA, the American Birding Association, that loon blog, the link is public. So anybody can get their hands on it and share it. So feel free to use those links. And I've just also put up the logos as well that we have for each of the three groups. And the reason I did that because Doug mentions us in his article.
Nice.
Oh, and whoever's writing, thank you. Except I'm not so sure. Is rescue and rehabilitation call themselves rescue and rehabilitation, or do they call themselves rescue and rehab? We have two logos for that group.
We do?
We do. It's semantics, right? The both. We know they're both, but maybe they like the short form or the long form.
I just made two versions, I think, for options back when we were making them, in case
maybe they've never
preference.
used it.
Yeah.
And for a while there was rescue, triage, and rehabilitation. So
there you go.
Yeah.
And so it may need to be adjusted. The next item I wanted to mention is Northeastern Loon Studies Working Group email, which I think some of us received, but perhaps not everybody. I've linked that in the agenda and the notes. If anybody wants that original copy sent to them, let me know. I tried to add, the links didn't work when I uploaded it. So I tried to add the links in, but if anybody wants that document, feel free to share. I find it a very informative meeting. Timing is difficult for me and my workload, but it's a very informative meeting with a lot of good research shared if anybody wants to attend. Speaking of which, is anybody giving presentations on it?
Presentations at that meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will. Jay, are you going to?
I'm not sure yet. So I don't know if I have anything that's worth saying.
Yeah, Harry Vogel, who's the head of the Loon Preservation Committee, and I should go back and mention this meeting that Kathy's talking about in Elswig. This is the Northeast Loon Study Working Group. So it's all the New England states and New York and adjacent Canadian provinces. And we meet almost every year at LPC in New Hampshire, mid-March. This year it's the 13th and the 14th for a 2-day meeting, and it's both in person and virtual. So we'll probably have, what, 40 or so people there in the room for the meeting, and then another, God knows how many, around the US and Canada on and off the meeting. And Harry Vogel did put out, what was it, a week ago, 10 days ago, sort of a call for who's coming and who would like to present at the meeting. So if you haven't gotten that, let Kathy know, or me know, or Jay know, or any of us know, and we can make sure that you're included in this. It is a great way to make connections.
And I have no doubt you'd be welcome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah, we need more Canadians, though. I know Rob Alvo is not coming anymore.
well, this we have what, 10% of the population of you guys? So this is a hard thing to remember. We got like 30 times the land base and 10% of the population, so we're a
But
little bit more spread
you've
out.
got all the loons. Yeah.
We've got all the loons. But that's another point. I don't know yet if there's going to be if Doug or Matt or myself are planning to share anything. I normally don't, unless it's an update from this group. And I don't have any really good updates to share from this group right now. But certainly it's worthwhile. And if they need an update, both Jay and Mark can say a few words about us, no problem.
I mean, one of the things that I told Harry I could do on the agenda is just give a quick update of the working groups, just 10, 15 minutes. But
that'd be good to do. So that's all I have for updates. I should share that the Rescue and Rehab just sent a really cool document around about a summary on the HP N5A1. I probably have that wrong, the high path avian flu. And if anybody wants that summary, reach out to myself or Mark. Mark will no doubt have several copies of it in his inbox. And that's an interesting one to do. And then after that, I think, without any further ado, Jay, if you have something to share, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Kathy. And I hope everybody's staying warm out there. I think we're above 32 for like the first time in like 2 or 3 weeks here in Ohio. So it is kind of nice, but I hope you're all staying warm. And yeah, Kathy invited me to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing down in South Carolina, specifically on Lake Jocassee. And maybe this is the appropriate time to do that since it is winter and most of our loons are not on our lakes right now, but hopefully down in the Atlantic Ocean or Pacific Ocean or the Gulf. And so I'd like to just take a little time to talk about what we're doing down there. Hopefully it's of interest to you, and hopefully some of the questions that we're looking at down there are questions that maybe you'd like to think about loons that are breeding on your lakes or just leaving your lakes in the summer. So I did put together a little PowerPoint presentation. I think I have the ability to share.
You
so
should.
I'm going to try that. Can everybody see the start of this thing as I get ready here? And there. I should be okay. Okay. Better. I can see this. Can everybody else see this okay? Okay.
It looks good, Jay. I'll keep an eye on the
Thank you.
chats
I
if we have any
yeah.
questions.
And yeah, I was going to say I can't see the chat, so anything comes up, feel free to blurt out anything. I'm pretty informal with this, and some of you have seen some of this, so I apologize if there's any redundancy there, but hopefully there's something that you might find interesting. But if you don't know me and my history a little bit, my name is again Jay Mager, and I teach at Ohio Northern University, and I got interested in working with loons since I was a little boy, spending my summers in northern Canada, about 3 hours north of Sault Ste. Marie, in a cabin where we had no plumbing, no electricity, and the only music we had was loon music to listen to on the lakes at night. And but when I started going to college and started to think about my life as perhaps a biologist, I really got kind of hooked on loons and some of the questions that we're really interested in trying to make sure that loons and humans can coexist. And So some of you may know I've spent part of my time as an undergraduate and as a master's student looking at parental care strategies, and in particular, how males and females potentially can divvy up labor in raising chicks. And that led to some interesting questions as to why it is that female loons only lay 2 eggs. Why don't they lay more and have more loon babies, and things will be much better on the lakes? Um, and I then sort of transitioned into doing work as a PhD student, looking at the role that social behavior plays on loon territory selection and defense. And specifically, that got me interested in looking at the structure and the function of a vocal signal that male loons produce called a yodel. And my guess is all of you are pretty familiar with that. And over the work of some 12, 15 years in Wisconsin, I really learned a lot about what males might be communicating about themselves in that single call. And it's really kind of fascinating that there appears to be a lot of information produced by that. And that really got me to really think about being a behavioral ecologist, or an individual that really thinks about what it is that loons are thinking about with respect to habitat selection and territory defense. And that in turn, more recently got me to start thinking about some of the other factors associated with loon survival. And just as a review, I'm guessing most of you have seen this map before or are familiar with it, but as you know, loons breed in most of these lakes and throughout Canada and into the lower 48. But there are other parts of the country where loons do spend part of their time during the year. In the yellow are basically areas where loons are reported to be migrating. So there are lakes in these regions that are migratory stopover lakes for loons. And then there's a whole swath of blue, both in North America and in Europe, as you can see, where loons basically spend their non-breeding season, or what we might call the overwintering period for our intents and purposes. So there's a lot of area that most of us don't cover because we don't have loons breeding in our lakes. And right now I teach at Ohio Northern University, which is in northwestern Ohio. And this is an area where a lot of loons will migrate through. And once in a blue moon, you might have a couple of birds overwintering on Lake Erie or some of the lakes in the southern part of the state. So I got kind of interested in thinking about these other parts of the loon's geographic distribution that might be important with respect to their long-term survival. Many of you are probably familiar with this map that was produced by BRI a few years ago, showing that the efforts associated with management have really had a profound impact on some of the parts of North America, as indicated by the light green. These are areas that were identified by BRI as areas where loon populations are growing, breeding populations are growing in number. And it's no small part due to the efforts of all of you who are here on this call, who have tried to really work on identifying and protecting all of those resources, both ecologically and behaviorally, that loons need in order to reproduce. But there's a huge swath of this country that still has a huge impact on loon overall survival. And again, most of the efforts that we've been talking about as a working group are involving things that are going on during the reproductive season, whether it be talking about, again, those ecological variables that are important for reproductive success, or the resources needed to make sure that loons aren't harmed by a lot of summering activities, or things that might induce loons to harm one another. There are three other parts of the year that we need to think about, and those are, the time during the fall when loons are sort of aggregating and coalescing and getting into these large groups and beginning to make their migratory trips south, east, or west, depending on where you are. We have to think about the impact that the overwintering period, whether it be birds that are wintering off the coast or in freshwater bodies of freshwater lakes, are experiencing. And then thinking about the importance of the spring migration back and the factors that might be affecting loon survival on their way back to their breeding lakes. I'm sorry, Gail, you have your hand up?
Yes, what's going on in the top summer photograph?
Yeah, those
Is
are
that,
two loons that are beating the crud out of one another. So those are two male loons that are basically grabbing each other by their bills and by their necks, and they're thrashing each other with their wings. And
thank
as
you.
you probably know, yeah, loons are pretty nasty to one another, especially individuals of the same sex. In fact, males will and females will Mark can attest to this, kill one another over territorial disputes. So it's not a trivial thing. And that can definitely impact long-term survival of some loons. Um, so yeah, that's what's happening there. Yeah. And you might be familiar with the migratory routes that loons pretty much have been estimated to undergo. This is just a map from the Birds of the World Life History Portrait. Again, the breeding range is in that blue and the overwintering range is in that orange. And those pink lines indicate the major routes by which we believe loons are migrating, at least south. So these parts of the country are definitely not surveyed as much with respect to monitoring loon behavior and loon survival for obvious reasons. But I think they're very important and they really scale the entire continent. This is just a map that's depicting winter data from eBird. So basically, this is a map depicting all the little reports of loons that are overwintering in various locations in North America. And you can see that, again, there's extensive numbers of loons that are being reported along both Atlantic and Pacific coasts. But again, there's a huge swath of freshwater bodies inland in the continental United States where loons do overwinter and probably need a little bit more look at being studied a little bit more in order to begin to think about the factors that affect um, not just migratory but winter survival. Um, Associated with that previous figure, this is actually looking at data from Christmas bird count data. So some of you may participate in Christmas bird counts wherever you may be. And of course, there are some people who have areas where they monitor lakes. And this shows over a roughly 50-year period, different what are called bird conservation regions within the United States. And the different colors indicate trends over the course of that 50-year period in terms of increases or decreases in the numbers of individuals that are reported via Christmas bird count data. And what you see here is that the red indicates areas where there's been a decline in the numbers of loons that have been reported. And the blue indicates places where numbers are increasing. And what's kind of interesting to me is that the number of loons that are increasing in the continental United States, at least on the eastern half, show a significant trend in the number of birds that are at least being reported by Christmas bird count data in those reports. And, Christmas bird count data go back to the early 1900s. So it's really kind of fascinating to see that at least loon numbers, at least overwintering in the continental United States, appear to also be increasing. So these waters are probably very poorly understood in terms of their importance to loon survival. And I've been kind of, living in Ohio now, quite interested in the factors that are associated with loon survival during the winter. More specifically, if we go to the southeastern United States, this is just a map of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. And you see the coast here indicated, along the shore here. But more specifically, you'll see that there is a particular area in northwest South Carolina that's part of the Savannah River watershed that houses a number of reservoirs. So these have all been created within the last 50 to 100 years to basically not only provide water to fresh water to a lot of the people in Georgia, South Carolina, but a lot of these reservoirs were created by Duke Power as a means of either cooling water for nuclear power or to generate hydroelectric power in the region. And as a result, Duke Energy and not just this little area indicated on red, but the lakes that are just south of that red are important in providing energy to North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. It's one of the principal areas where energy is being supplied. This area highlights the area where I've been fortunate to work over the last 7 or 8 years now called Lake Jocassee. If you've seen the movie Deliverance with Burt Reynolds, I wouldn't watch it late in the evening, but definitely it's a movie that you might be interested in. If you want to see Lake Jocassee, you can best see it at the beginning of the movie when they're blowing up the sides of the cliffs and flooding the cemetery in the movie. That's live footage of the construction of Lake Jocassee in 1968. It basically filled in 3 years earlier than expected, so that the water was pretty much all there by 1973. So this is Lake Jocassee is a roughly young lake. It's only about 50 years old. It's extremely clear. If you take a Secchi disc and actually drop it down in there, and the Secchi disc is a way in which you can measure water clarity, the readings are roughly about 21 feet. So you can see about 21 feet down in this area. What's also kind of neat about it is that the Department of Natural Resources, South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, have stocked this lake with a number of fish, including a number of sport fish, including some trout species and bass species, but also a number of species that we sometimes refer to as schooling fish or forage fish. And so it really is an area with a lot of fish, very clear water, and it doesn't freeze during the winter. And so you can imagine that this is an area that, at least if I were a loon, I might be interested in spending my winter. This is just an overall map of Lake Jocassee. You can see that the upper parts of it do extend into North Carolina. It's actually fed by rainwater. It's actually a temperate rainforest of all things, and it receives almost 200 inches of rainfall a year. And that rainfall comes in through these four major tributaries that I've highlighted here. And there's a major dam on the south end that empties into Lake Kiowee. And again, that's a location where hydroelectric power is generated. It's also an area where they conduct what's called reverse pump transfer, which basically means that during non-demand hours, they'll actually pump water back from Lake Kiowee below up into Lake Jocassee. And in doing so, it'll pull up a lot of fish, and it will actually stun them due to the change in altitude, sort of mess up their swim bladders. And so as a result, it's a place where there's a lot of fish that have a tough time swimming. And as you can imagine, a lot of fish-eating species of birds like loons really are attracted to that part of the lake. Every year we've conducted surveys on Lake Jocassee about the same time of year, usually in late February, early March, mainly because we know that those birds are overwintering there. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but as you might know, common loons will actually molt their flight feathers, all of them at once. It's what's sometimes referred to as a complete remigial molt. And in so doing, it renders them flightless. And that's one of the problems with loons in that, especially from mid-January through early March, the birds are flightless. And that's a problem if you get iced in, definitely on a lake that tends to freeze over. But again, that's not the case in Lake Jocassee. So at that time of year, mid-January, you'll see a lot of feathers on the lake, and you can grab them because these birds are just losing all their flight feathers. But then they grow those in roughly what we believe to be about a 6-week period, again into late February and into mid-March. How am I doing so far? Is this okay? Okay, I'll keep going. I've been very fortunate to have been asked by the individual that really started this effort. That individual is Brooks Wade. Brooks is a naturalist who has lived on Lake Jocassee now, I believe, for over roughly 15 years now. He's the one that brought to the attention of Jim Peruk and myself the phenomenon of over 100, maybe 150 birds wintering on Lake Jocassee every winter. Lake Jocassee is also a big migratory stopover lake, presumably for loons that are migrating from the Gulf Coast northward. And he has seen literally thousands of loons on the lake at given times when there have been fallouts of loons in this region. The lake exists on the southern, what they call the blue wall, or the southern ridge of the Appalachian Mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains. So it's basically protected by this big wall. And every year we've supported citizen science groups to come in, usually for 2 weeks during the winter and spring. I host a week of winter loon research, which occurs usually the first full week in March. I believe this year it happens from March 3rd through March 8th. And then Jim Peruk, many of you know, leads a group that looks at the migratory behavior of the loons, and that runs a little bit later in the spring as the loons are flying, which is this year going to be between March 23rd and March 28th. But again, we have this group of volunteers, and we are dedicated to not only monitoring the loon populations there, but also tracking their behavior. And it's a really cool time to come and watch loons. As you can kind of see in this slide, especially in late January and through February and into early March, the loons are beginning what's referred to as that pre-alternate molt, or sometimes they call it the pre-breeding plumage molt or pre-breeding molt. And the loons do it kind of asynchronously, as you can kind of see here. I mean that not all loons are entering the same stage of the molt at the same time. And so you can kind of see that bird to the left. He's got a lot of his black feathers in on his head. Unfortunately, you can also see he's got some fish tackle coming out of the bill at the base. But you can see the bird right in the front there is really still kind of got that winter plumage head, although it's starting to get some of those domino feathers associated with the wing on the back. The whole thing I'm trying to get at here is that it's really kind of neat to see the sequence at which this occurs. And it's also really kind of good because it can allow us to track individual birds if we can identify unique characteristics with respect to their plumage. So we can follow a bird, single bird around for an entire day if we really wanted to, and see what it's doing without having to go in and necessarily band the birds. Although we have banded some of them, and they have come back to Lake Jocassee and at the same location. So they exhibit a huge amount of what we call winter site fidelity. And part of the experience is to actually monitor loon behavior. This is just a crew of my students that I bring down in November to do the same sort of project. But the loons are really, I don't know, they behave a lot differently than what we see during the breeding season. In fact, we can get up pretty close and tight to them to the boat. And sometimes we're adopted by the flock, which is really kind of cool. But what we've also seen is that there's, oh yeah, we've done some banding there, and I can talk a little bit about that, but I'm guessing most of you are familiar with that. We also have evening programs. So we try to get some of you to come down and give evening talks. I know here's Nina Schock giving a talk one evening. We've had Mark Pokers come in, Natasha Bartolota comes every year. And they've really added to the value of this, not just based upon the research, but in terms of the dynamics of all the different members of the citizen science community and research community that are involved in loon research. So it's really 5 days, 6 days of hardcore loon work, starting, from when we get up in the morning to after we have our evening programs at night. And it's for lunatics, that's for sure. But we do have fun. This is just a pie diagram showing sort of the breakdown of loon behavior during the winter. One of the first projects that I was really interested in is how does this compare to what loons are doing during the reproductive season, and how does it compare to some of the studies that have been done looking at loon behavior on wintering areas. And this is what we call a time activity budget, or a tab. And it basically is just what it is. It's a way to actually look at the way in which loons are budgeting their time towards certain activities. In this case, the major activities are foraging, as you can imagine, taking care of themselves, preening and bathing, swimming around, locomotion, or sometimes flying, and then resting. Loons do get aggressive every once in a while during the winter. It makes a very small fraction of the loon activity budget. But in general, what we found is that this activity budget's very similar to what has been seen in Florida over the winter, and it's very similar to what has been seen in Virginia over the winter. But one thing that's really kind of interesting about Jocassee is that the loons there appear to be quite different with respect to their degree of social behavior with other loons during the winter. We have some birds that are kind of nomads. They really are not interested in interacting with any other loon, and they kind of do their own thing. They find their own space, and rarely do they interact with another loon. And when they dive, when they forage, they dive for really long periods of time, anywhere between a minute to upwards to 3.5 to 4 minutes long. And once in a while, these birds will come up with large prey items, and you can kind of see that this one's got, looks like some type of trout here. Sometimes they'll come up with channel catfish and other species that you would associate with deeper water. And so we believe these birds are probably devoting most of their time foraging and looking for these big fish. In contrast, there are other birds that are quite social, for lack of a better word. And what I mean by that is that they like to hang out with other loons quite a bit in these big rafts. And they will actually swim with one another. And when individuals come upon a school of these bait fish or these forage fish, they will all together start foraging on those big, we call them bait balls. And I know the fish people don't like me saying that, but these big balls of bait fish. And what's kind of cool is that the way in which they forage for these is kind of in a very cooperative, if I can use that term, way. It appears as though the loons are actually working together to keep these bait fish in the school and keep them close to the surface where they can force the fish out of the water and begin to grab them. And you can kind of see this with this crude video I'm going to show you here. This is just a group of loons. And what you're going to see is that they are going to be swimming from the right to the left, and they're all going to be diving. And in doing so, they're all sort of staying together. And in my view, they're kind of trying to, it looks like they're trying to keep that bait ball together and keep on picking fish off of that bait ball until they can no longer do it and the bait ball disperses or breaks apart. And so if I can play that, you can kind of see it. It's not the greatest. Again, I apologize. It's off my cell phone. But you can sort of see they're going together and they're going down pretty much at the same time and they're coming up and they're all going in the same direction, following that little ball. And so it raises questions if you're familiar with the behavior of some large mammals, aquatic mammals, such as whales or porpoises, that perhaps these individuals are perhaps working together to forage on these small little bait fish. If you were to actually look at the distribution of the time that a loon would spend with other loons, that is within a very close proximity of another loon, what you'll see is that this diagram sort of represents a number of the different loons that we have observed and the proportion of time they spend with other loons. So this is basically saying that a loon or a focal loon or a loon that we observed spent no time with another loon, so 0% of the time. And this would indicate 100% of the time. And this is just what we call a frequency distribution. It's basically looking at how frequently we see loons either being with relatively no birds or spending their entire time with other loons. And this creates a little bit of a model where we can sort of say, okay, we could actually group these loons into categories as being sort of solitary birds if they spend between 0 and 20% of their time with another loon. Loosely social if they spend between 20 and 70% of their time with another loon. And strongly social when they spend between 70 and 100% of their time with another loon. And so you can sort of model this into 3 categories. And what's kind of interesting is that if you group loons based upon these different strategies, one of the things you'll see is that they occupy different parts of the lake, which is what we're kind of interested in, where most of our solitary birds stay in the open basin, which is where some of the deeper waters are in the lake. Our loosely social birds, again, are in that same region, which is kind of interesting, but they also occupy this little arm on one of the lakes where we see the waters tend to be a little shallower. And then we have these strongly social birds, which actually preoccupy this arm right here. Now, I won't go into all this detail, but it's something we can talk about off, at another day. But what's also kind of neat is that if you separate these birds into these 3 groups and look at their time activity budgets, you see there's distinct differences between the 3, where our solitary birds spend almost 2/3 of their time foraging. Our loosely social birds spend roughly 50% of the time, but our strongly social birds really drop down in the proportion of time that they spend foraging. And that gets you to think about what the costs and benefits are of being in a group among loons. And really, what I'm kind of interested in is thinking about the trade-offs associated with each of these strategies. Why is it that a loon that comes back to Jocassee year after year always stay as this nomad, solitary individual and does their own thing and just forages for the big stuff? And why do you get other birds that seem to come back every year and get in the same group and work with one another to forage on these smaller bait fish? So this gets me into my bigger question to the rest of the group, or my bigger issue to get you to think about during the breeding season. But as a behavioral ecologist, I'm kind of interested in what's called Darwinian economics, thinking about the benefits and costs of decision making. And in this case, for loons, what are the benefits and costs associated with being in a group? And we see that, during the breeding season all the time. One of the definite benefits, at least in thinking about the loons wintering on Jocassee, is that there's the opportunity for cooperative foraging. It could be that the loons work together to more easily detect these bait balls and work together to perhaps feed upon them and reap the benefits of that. It could also provide increased vigilance from predators, whether it be sharks that are looking for perhaps loon dinners off of the Gulf Coast, or bald eagles that might want to take a loon, whether it be during the breeding season or during the wintering season. And there are also potential costs associated with this group living. One is that you have more individuals in a group, there's going to be a greater likelihood for competitive interactions, which could be costly to each and every individual participating in that group. And there could be increased likelihood of perhaps transmitting something pathogenically or between individuals, such as a virus, or such as a shared food resource that might be infected with some type of toxin or some type of poison that might be to the detriment of the individuals participating in that group. So with that in mind, I'm really kind of interested in looking more at loon social behavior, especially those associated with social foraging, not just during the wintering season, but I'd like to ask this group to maybe take a little bit closer look at the social interactions that you see among loons during the breeding season. For example, we know that loons do assess one another, their fighting ability and their motivation through acoustic communication, and in this case, through what we often refer to as social gatherings, where loons will bill dip and peer and look at one another and swim in these tight circles that sometimes get more aggressive and competitive. Other times we might see loons swim in a row, and it appears as though everybody seems to be fine with one another, and they basically maybe are foraging with one another, or perhaps coordinating activities that are going to be either pre-migratory or something that's beneficial to them on the lake that they're currently on. So as you look at social behavior among loons, I'd urge you to begin to look more carefully about all the different types of activities, all the different types of behaviors that you see when loons are socially engaged with one another. For example, one behavior that we don't see a lot during the foraging sort of sociality among loons during the wintering season, as well as during the late breeding season, is this phenomenon of head bowing. Many of you have seen that, where basically the loons will sort of tuck their heads inward and point their bills either just above or into the water. Is that something that communicates something that is sort of different than the costs and benefits that we see among the loons during the year? So with that said, I hope this gave you a little bit of an introduction to Jocassee, what we're doing down there, some of the interesting findings that we have down there. And if anything, I hope it might get you to think a little bit more about the benefits and costs of social behavior that you might see during the breeding season, and how important it might be not just for the breeding season, but also for either pre-migratory or the migratory season itself. And with that, I want to thank not just Brooks Wade, who's here on the right, but also Jim Peruk, many of you know, here on the left, and Sherry Apps, who's an active member of this group, who is just a loon nut, but has really been a critical key component of our work at Jocassee. Lastly, all the organizations that are listed here have really been helpful in all that we've done. We just can't thank you enough. So I hope that works. Maybe it was too much, Kathy, but
No, actually, I think
it.
it's perfect. And I think the whole goal is to have questions come up. I have questions, and I'm sure other people will think of questions as I start talking. First off, Jay, is there any of those things any of the information you shared you want to add to the folder for the meeting?
Oh, I'll upload that, no problem, to the folder.
Okay.
I'll upload the presentation if that works. And
Now,
we've written a
you
couple of
mentioned
papers. Mhm.
you mentioned something about reporting on social behaviors, but there's no pathway to do that right now, is there?
Yeah. No, and that's again, my training is in animal behavior, so I've been trained to think about methodologies that can really begin to look at behaviors among loons. One thing that I have done in the past is that I've monitored loon behavior during an hour, and if loons do get into social gatherings, just start ticking through observation. Do you see bill dipping? Do you see head bowing? Do you see birds swimming in a tight circle, or do you tend to see them swim parallel to one another? That's one big thing that I have seen in my observations over time, is that when loons are sort of going not head to tail, but all sort of in a row with one another. These things tend to be more benign and do not escalate as if we have things going like this and a lot of this going on that many of you have seen. My guess is what's going on there is that you're having assessment of individuals and their fighting abilities and their motivation in escalating a contest. But that Loon language I have not deciphered yet.
Okay, that's
And I don't think I
interesting.
ever will. I keep asking them, but they don't tell me what they're doing.
Now Phil has some question, but I wanted to add another comment as well. You used eBird maps, and I
Mhm.
really want to engage and encourage people to have data that doesn't fit into theirs or just data in general added to eBird. I find myself, the more we can push this massive, powerful tool, and if we want a lesson on eBird sometime, I'm happy to do it. It provides me with a lot of information on where loons are, where to find them, and everything, but it's only as good as the number of people that use it. So when we're getting up to that 60,000, 100,000, 200,000 people using eBird is much more valuable. So I really, especially things like I always get comments like, "Oh, I saw 64 loons on this lake." It's like, "Great. Has nothing to do with my program. Please put it to eBird where I can find
Yeah.
it later."
Yes. And
Um,
I'd even add, one thing that can even make your data more powerful is that it's one thing to keep a list. And a lot of people use eBird to, write down what they've seen and keep a life list. But hopefully you all know that too, you can add the breeding status of each bird that you see, or at least what you perceive to see. So whether or not the birds are nest building or whether or not they have young, all of those data are just as valuable, if not even more valuable than just even saying, hey, I've seen a loon there. So if you take that time, and people have written some interesting articles about the importance of really taking the time to think about breeding codes and other things in their observations that could be really valuable. But then again,
yeah.
just
And
completing a checklist can be.
there's one really interesting study that uses loons and eBird data, but I found it was kind of slanted in the targeting. So I have questions about it because you have very different groups and activities involved, and that's one of the problems with eBird. It's incidental collection of data, so anybody's collecting it anyway.
Yes,
But when you get into those high numbers, it approaches random, and that's when it gets to be really powerful. But I
yes.
better shut up and let Phil ask whatever his
No, yeah,
question
I was
is.
going to say that there are some algorithms that the people at eBird do use, especially individuals that they can actually sort of survey and I don't know if the right word is filter individual observations based upon some past history of observers. I know they have the ability to do that. I know eBird has some ways in which they try to get around some of those biases, and they do have workshops on that. It's beyond my cranial capacity.
Well, there's not only that bias, but there's bias by the scientists as well. They're going to
Oh
sit there
yeah,
and say, okay, I know there's loons in these 25 lakes, so I'm just going to go to them.
yeah.
So it goes both
Well,
ways, and it's all about your goals and objectives. Uh,
couldn't agree more.
if you add the same bird to eBird every day, it'll deal with it. I can promise you that that is being accommodated for in the system.
Yeah.
Being in one of the big migratory system places, we have birds that are reported 50 times by individuals. So they have an algorithm to deal with that one. But Phil, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, I have a question. So you mentioned that some of these loons that are overwintering there, you've managed to band. Um, are you able to identify individuals year to year as, the same highly social individuals or the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
solitary individuals?
Yeah, the answer is yeah, and they seem to be doing that same strategy year after year. There's one bird that it looks like it may have transitioned from going solitary to being social, but the other birds have come back. We have about 12 of them that have been banded in Jocassee, and they repeatedly come back and come to the same location and appear to do the same thing. We don't know the genders of all of them, but what's kind of interesting is that we had one of our birds tagged that was actually identified on his breeding lake in upstate Minnesota. And we know it's a male now because he was the father of some loon chicks up in, again, northwestern Minnesota. So we don't know the gender. We don't
Oh, we
separate
lost.
hatch year birds from adult birds, but that's about it at this point.
Well, that answers Marge's question about age being a factor.
Definitely could, Marge. It definitely could. It's something we have, and maybe to Phil's point, something we might see a transition over time as birds figure things out.
Now, in the Quebec work that we were seeing the loons taking fish, there's this concern about short-term learning, teaching chicks and that short-term, I'm not sure evolution is right, but how they learn different behaviors from an adult. And that could always be a case here too, isn't it? If they come in and the cohort flies in and this behavior is done, it may continue that way.
Bingo. That's exactly right. I think Kevin Keno noticed perhaps some sexual differences on the birds overwintering, or at least not overwintering, but staging in Lake Superior. But again, these are all individuals that were in the same group. So can you tease out gender, the sex of the birds, without the impact that perhaps the group that they're in may have had an effect that I don't know the right word is, that learning within a group. So it'd be great if we can catch a bunch of birds within the same group and see if they end up in the same locations year after year after year. I wouldn't put it past loons.
Cool. Any other questions, anyone? Okay. Well, I'm glad you shared that. If you want to upload stuff, that'd be great. I'll send everybody the minutes as usual later. Um, Steering committee reminders and updates. We don't have any. We did not do anything over Christmas, did we, guys? So I guess we'll have to have a conversation about any updates that have to come forward. All three subcommittees that are ongoing, which is lead platforms, and what one am I missing? Is it just lead and platforms now?
Good question.
Well, subcommittees will take the time and we'll contact people about their work, and we'll make sure we have some updates on that for February. Future topics are undecided right now. Things are welcome. If there's problems with the timing of this meetings, that's great. Is there any updates, Jay? Jay, you were doing a survey through the rescue and rehab. Are there any updates related to that, or is that for another meeting?
It might be for another meeting because I think we're just
Okay.
starting to get, people have been wonderful at emailing me responses to some of the questions. It's really, and Mark, you might want to chime in on this too. Really just after a couple of years of being in these working groups, are we still happy with the mission of each of these groups? And in what ways can we have them evolve to better serve everybody in the group? And that can range from potentially overlapping and merging the groups so that we don't have as many meetings to go to maybe having meetings once every other month rather than every month, or maybe changing the mission statements of each of the groups and going in a different direction. So did I state that all right, Mark? Or maybe there's something
No,
you
I
can
think
add?
that's perfect, and I see Shula's on the call. And
Mhm.
that, for those of you who are going to be staying for the next working group meeting, starting at 5:30, that's going to be one of the points of discussion for today's rescue and rehab working group.
Then we'll look forward to hearing about that at the next meeting. Perhaps you guys can summarize it for us and we can talk about that in the future. It's not something that we've discussed very much with this idea, the idea of changing our working group, but everything deserves a refresh and a reconsideration and things like that. So I think it's a fair approach to take. And maybe literally that's what we should do in February is just updates and see what people's plans are if they have anything new coming up for the new year or something like that. But other than the thoughts that we have ongoing right now about some platform communications, if anybody has a specific topic they want to see us discuss in a meeting, please forward it because we'll see what we can do to fit it in. Yep. I think, are we going to actually end early?
Not
I think I put everybody to sleep.
at
No.
all, Jay. No, that was a really good
No.
talk.
Yeah. Well, any other questions on any topic related to the group or any questions about, did anybody out there actually read the ABA talk, the ABA article that Doug Tozer put out. It's quite intense. Laura, you did. Did
It's
you
great.
edit it, Jay? Did you see it in advance?
I've seen it. I won't divulge anything, but I'll say I've read it. It's out, and it's really good.
Okay.
It's long. He's covered a lot of topics. He covered some of Walter Piper's work.
Oh,
It's worth
good.
reading. And as Jay had mentioned Christmas bird count during this talk, and Christmas bird count, and BBC data, breeding bird survey, BBS survey, still two of the biggest data sources for that big, massive amount of Canadian loons and population level, mainly because they've been consistent for so long. I'm not going to sit there and tell you that a roadside survey for birds is a great choice for studying loons, but it's been consistent for so many years that you can see trends in it, and they're quite solid trends. And they are showing for the first time a decline in loons in Canada, which is concerning, and hopefully not going to stay about, but we'll have to wait and see. So it's an interesting article to read, and I advise everybody to take the time to read it. And maybe if they want, you can share your thoughts on it next time through. I'm out
Kathy,
of ideas.
I
Sorry?
just have a quick question for you. The last meeting, or maybe it was the steering committee meeting, you had mentioned that really nice video, Loons a Cry from the Mist,
Yes.
and I have not been able to find that available in the US.
It is available. It's available out of the Nature Network,
Okay.
which I can't access.
Yeah, me too.
It actually has Walter Piper on it and Linda Grenzer on it, so they might know the best way to get it. I can roundabout get it in Canada, but it's been the version I have is embargoed in the US. You can't see it in the
Yeah.
US.
Yeah.
There is
think
a French
that's-
version that's available right now through France and Belgium, if that helps you.
I think I have a PDF of it's like Kathy said, it's open. Oh, the film, I
The
definitely
film.
Film.
do.
The film.
You can
Yeah.
yeah, you can access it. You just have to find the right YouTube link that has it. That I'm
I've
sure.
been looking and looking and not being able, I can
Oh.
find clips, I can find,
Okay.
other kinds of things, but I haven't been able to find the whole film.
Mark, I found
In
it, but I
English
didn't
or
trace
French.
myself. If I can find it where I can see the whole thing, I'll send you the link. But
Thank
you.
I did see the whole thing.
I
It's
think
really
Brandy
good.
was gonna say something too.
Yeah, I just watched it last week. I'm trying to figure out where I watched it on. But
I just picked up the Canadian version, and it was so hard to get to. I had to go to a TV website, and then I had to go to trending, and then I had to scroll through this long list until I
Yeah.
found it. But hopefully, like I don't think I'll ever get a chance to see the US one. But if any of you have that link, let us know, and I will share it in the e-news in the
That'd be great.
minutes. Brandy's
And
still looking for
I
it.
can email Walter
Yeah.
and Kevin and Linda too and see if they know. Yeah.
And
Speaking
you
of-
may have to end up paying for it, unfortunately. You may have to
Who
drop a
knows?
charge to this nature channel, Love Nature channel. I think it's a cable channel.
I don't know anything about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Or pick up something like Slack or Pluto or
Yeah,
something like this.
but I'm old, I don't know anything about streaming or any of these kinds of modern conveniences. So, yeah.
Anything else over here, guys? Anybody have anything they want to share? Any events coming up that are important or?
Just one quick thing, just because Walter's name came up. Walter this week, just a day or two ago, sent me just a single photograph of an immature loon that apparently he banded on a lake, and I'd have to go back and pick up his emails. I think in Minnesota last year, that is wintering on a lake in Tennessee. And
Well,
he's got a nice picture of the bird's legs up with the band showing. Oh, Sheila.
we have the photographer here, and I did want to introduce Lori because after Linda alerted me about this, then I was sent Lori's photo and I made a post, and Lori and I connected on Facebook. So I invited her to join this meeting and then the LLR meeting. So Lori, can you tell everybody about it?
You're muted, Lori.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So I took some more pictures today, and hold on, I want to tell you because this bird actually came out of Wisconsin, not Minnesota.
All right.
Let me find his email. Okay. All right, so I don't know all these things. So he's got on here GSRSCC Wisconsin.
Band colors.
Okay.
So-
Oneida Juvenile.
So I wonder if Marge knows the lake.
Yeah, it's Oneida Lake.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was out there. We had about 7 and 8 loons. I live in Tennessee, southern Tennessee, on Timms Ford Lake, and we get lots of loons that winter here. And I had 7 out there yesterday. Today I had 8.
Wow.
And yesterday and today I saw the banded loon. I did see a second banded loon, but I was not able to get any pictures. But I'm diligent. I'll keep looking.
Is your lake another flooded river lake, Lori?
Our lake is a reservoir. It's very, very big. So we get, I've seen as many as 70 loon out there in a raft.
Wow.
Now, maybe Jay and Mark understand this idea, but if I think back to my bald eagle years, I remember reading about increased mercury on some reservoir dammed lakes. Is
Yeah.
that a concern today? And a pathway for mercury into these birds?
I think
Yeah.
potentially we'd want to know more about the pH and, organic material in the shallower areas of the lakes and where the sources of water are. I mean, Jay, you were talking about the sources of water for Jocassee.
Yeah,
This lake has a source of water that comes from a river. And this lake is also stocked with, you were talking about the lake in South Carolina, how it's stocked with fish. This lake is stocked with fish also, trout and other fish.
Yeah. I think one of my questions would be what's upstream from where
What's
the,
upstream?
when we think about Jack Barr's work in Sudbury, Ontario, when we think about some of Dave Evers' work in New Hampshire near the Holter chlorine plant that produced a lot of mercury, I think, upstream sources of pollution as well as local sources of
they watch that very closely.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have a Timms Ford Lake Council that regularly checks the pH level and the oxygen levels on this lake.
Do you know if they're looking at any pollutants in any of the fish or
Yeah.
invertebrates or okay, good.
Yeah.
Good,
It's
good.
very, very clean lake.
Nice.
Another topic I'd like to put in people's minds to think about for the next year. I shared this with Jay because I needed a better idea than mine. We had a second-year loon on a really isolated lake in the middle of nowhere in the prairies. And I'm wondering how common we get these birds in central Ontario and if it's going to central North America and if that's going to get more common. Because of course you're going to get them in the East Coast and the West Coast, but are you going to get them in the middle of the Yellowstone area and like this one was in the middle of the prairies and so forth? And are they just isolated events or are they trying to overwinter on larger lakes and just well, they wouldn't. I don't think they'd succeed this year if they tried to overwinter on larger northern lakes. I think the only one left that's open maybe is what Superior and Huron. I don't know. Is Lake Erie completely iced in now?
Yeah, Lake Erie's completely iced over. Last time I heard. So the lake effect is not really there right now. I told you how cold it's been.
There you go. You guys can watch A Cry in the Mist on Peacock, which is NBC, which I can't get in Canada.
I've heard of that. I've never, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It is good.
it does make you wonder too, and I hope I'm not taking too much time, but that the closer that loons can overwinter to their breeding lakes without the risk of having it ice over, would that be advantageous to a loon in a way if you think about it in terms of all the flying that they have to do and getting back to the lake as soon as possible? If you can get to a lake that's easy to get, if you migrate to overwinter to a lake that's in Tennessee or maybe even on Lake Michigan, is that going to be better for a loon than actually going all the way down to the Gulf in terms of the time you spent flying to get down there and then having to rush to get back, presumably before your competitors get back to a breeding lake? It's really kind of an interesting question to think about.
Yeah, it is. And especially when you hear the stuff from the East Coast about adding
Mhm.
to that, like there's two layers to do that. Maybe they will have better access to lakes that way, but with the modern day shifts in the polar currents and things like that, and when we get these sudden ice ins,
Yeah,
like snow in Florida, um, how does this impact these birds during that molt season?
yeah,
So there's
yeah,
there's 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 still, I guess, greater risk in some ways, but they might not have the history to know that.
yeah. That's that's the $1 million question. I mean, molting is a different topic that Mark and I have definitely talked about. What are the costs associated with molting and loons? And it's not trivial, I'm guessing, especially if you do have a synchronous molt like that. But
Yeah.
a lot of questions that I'm
I
sure
mean,
to.
the nice thing is there's energetics data from a lot of other species, but you're right, the simultaneous nature of the molt is going to be different.
Yeah. But to Mark's point
Well,
too, yeah, the social behavior occurs in cormorants and in pelicans and other species. It's really kind of nifty, interesting to think about costs and benefits associated with that.
Jay, I have
yes.
a question. Let's see, Jay,
Yeah.
I have a question. I was just
Yeah.
thinking about, the kind of if there's better chances of surviving for loons that winter on those inland lakes than on the ocean. I mean, I don't know that much about the ocean dangers, except we've seen pictures of loons that have been attacked by sharks and then red tide. And
Yeah.
more recently, I've been hearing about like loons that are sort of stranded close to shore after storms where they can't get back out into the ocean. They're starving because there's not enough fish there. So what do you think, if their odds are any better or not?
Well, that's $1 million question, and I'm gonna have to talk that over with Mark and others. Some people have mentioned that perhaps, especially on years when there aren't forage fish available in the marine environment, um, oh my gosh, come on, Mark, who's your old roommate?
Who are we talking about here, Jay?
Oh, Peanut Menhaden.
Oh, Paul Spitzer.
Paul, I'm sorry, I'm tired.
That's
Paul
okay.
Spitzer really hypothesized that the peanut menhaden are really critical forage fish for the marine, wintering loons. And if those aren't available, I believe he suggested that loons do sort of might resort to probing the bottom of the ocean floor for mussels that not only might be less nutritionally beneficial, but might also harbor certain pathogens. Um, and to your point, Sheila, maybe that would infer that perhaps the freshwater lakes are better, but you know, I wish I could ask the loon and it would tell me. Perhaps there are certain things that are needed by loons that are provided by the marine environment that are essential for a loon to come back or do be really well. One other thing I forgot to mention is that, and Mark can talk more about this, he knows the physiology better than I do, but as a loon goes from being a freshwater breeder to going to winter in marine environments, they have a way of osmoregulation whereby they have a salt gland that's embedded within the skull that becomes active and helps excrete salt. Is that a huge physiological cost that a loon would occur, would have in a marine environment, that type of a stress wouldn't be as much of a burden on a bird on a freshwater lake? So to your point, there probably are. That's one of the reasons why I was kind of interested in Jocassee in the first place, is that if you could begin to compare maybe benefits of being in the freshwater versus being in the ocean, you can start to really begin to compare that. And that's where that time activity budget comparison was all about, is beginning to compare what we see in freshwater versus marine environments and seeing if there was a difference. So sorry, I was a little long-winded there, but your point is extremely well taken. In fact, that was the real driver of me, starting to look at loon behavior down in Jocassee, is how does that compare? If they're feeding less on Jocassee, does that mean that they're less stressed and they can spend more time, sleeping and preening and doing everything else that they need to get ready? That's a great, great question. And I don't think I'll be able to answer it in my lifetime, but at least I'll be able to gather some data that other people might be able to look at and make some more inferences.
I think, and I can't even paraphrase this well, so Mark or somebody or you, Jay, can jump in, but I know Walter's starting to study the mortality rates, I think, of the young juveniles down in the Gulf. And I thought something about like a lot of them aren't surviving more than, out of that first winter. It'd just be interesting if there was enough of a sample on the lakes to see if they're surviving better.
Yes, I think you're onto something. I think first year mortality is probably going to be a little bit larger for a number of reasons. How significant that is a good question. I will mention that you might know that Kevin Kino did a large study putting satellite telemetry units, implanting them in loons. And one of the reasons he stopped implanting them in juvenile birds is that he saw that they experienced higher mortality. And I think he was really cautious about continuing that. Now, I could be totally wrong, but if memory serves me, Mark, you might correct me on that. That was something he saw. And so it made me think, well, is it natural or is it because of the implants? And it could be natural mortality, could be the implants. One thing to think about is, should we be banning juvenile birds, and what type of a burden would that add to the birds that are overwintering? It's a good sort of question to think about.
Yeah. I've got some thoughts on that for another time, but yeah.
I'm just picturing the logistic difficulties of doing that.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, and I've been talking to Kevin about this, is there's some new telemetry equipment that's being developed right at the moment that's going to be much smaller and much less invasive and much cheaper. And there's a bunch of us talking about it. And hopefully we'll get to try it in the next year or two.
Well, that'll be interesting, because right now the only real option is surgery, right?
Yeah. I mean, the big long lasting ones, but and
well, we should probably
that's abdominal surgery, so it's
Except for we have put out geolocator tags. It's just the resolution is not as good. So like you might say it's in the southeast, but you don't know that it's on X reservoir in the southeast.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things with Kevin's study that was pretty unique, is we had, adults and different things moving at the same time with markers on them too, both geolocator and transmitters. So we got to see a lot of the differences between how the juveniles and the adults were reacting at things that were happening at the same time.
So much that we have not dug into yet.
But
we should also think about the next meeting. What time do you guys start, Mark?
5:30.
5:30.
So I'll probably jump off in just a minute here.
Yeah. Anything else, guys?
These are all great points.
Well, perhaps it is time to say goodbye to everyone until this time next month. And great talk, Jay, from the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation.
Large, great point too. Yeah.
Yep.
Image quality.
Yep. And things to keep in mind. Like I said, if anybody wants the NELSWIG stuff, feel free to reach out and enjoy the articles and enjoy it's, in my opinion, Well, if Peacock is anything like all the other apps, you can subscribe for a month and then end your subscription without paying before the month is over.
Yeah.
So it's worth it for the $8 or for the almost $8 cost, because it is a very interesting one. And it's nice to hear Walter, Piper, and Doug in their elements, because both of them do an excellent job on it. I guess I will just say goodbye to everyone, and we'll see you all next month. Okay. Bye, folks.
Thanks, Kathy, for hosting.
Yep. Thanks for talking, Jay.
Good. Well, I hope it served the purpose.
I think it will. I think it did. Okay.
I don't
Bye,
know.
folks.
Thank